Welcome to another Treeline Academy E-Scouting Elk MasterClass mini-series segment. Today we're going to answer a question that I've been getting a lot more recently about how to not only create, but how to use and integrate Google Earth Pro Flyover tours into your e-scouting and hunt planning work. In this segment, we're going to zero in on how to specifically use this tool to analyze and break down hunting areas. First of all, let's talk about why we would want to use Google Earth Pro Flyover tours. If you are taking the E-Scouting Elk course, you know by now that I say this all the time. The more historical knowledge that you can absorb about your potential hunting area or areas, the better your odds. It's really that simple. The flyover tours allow you to set back, less distracted, and just take in the territory, specific features, and even the overall topography within your specific hunt areas. You might be surprised with what you will uncover or that you'll realize or pick up on during these tours. Sometimes it's very hard to see and absorb everything when you are just mousing around and tilting the screen. The 3D flyover tours, when they are set up correctly, allow you to specifically and methodically view hunt areas from different angles, perspectives, and even different elevations. They can give you a really good idea of the terrain difficulty, the elk finding features, and even specific navigational cues, so that when your boots hit the ground, you are more prepared. Let's take a look at how to set up a flyover tour and how to adjust those specific settings in Google Earth Pro. Here we are in Google Earth Pro. The first order of business is to set up or create a path. You can create a path within Google Earth Pro, or you can even import an existing route that you've done or prepared in your hunt platform of choice. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is actually set up a path. So you can see here on the screen, I've got this path in red, but real quickly, I'm going to jump over here and turn on the EarthPoint topographic map layer. And you can see that I've created this path along this pack trail that runs up this drainage. So just for an example of how to create a path, I'm going to trace this path that runs up this drainage right here. So we're going to come over here and we're going to select the path tool. And we're going to start clicking on the path along where we want to go. I'm going to do this pretty quickly just to give you an example. So we're just basically going to fly up along this pack trail up this drainage so that we can get a bird's eye elevated view of what the terrain and the possible elk finding features might look like. So we've got this path. We're going to leave it untitled. We're not going to use this one. I'm just using this one to set up. So for the sake of seeing the path during the tour, you might want to adjust the style. So we can click on the style button, come over here. Let's just go ahead and make this a blue, say okay. We'll take this width up to 2.0 and we'll say okay. So now we've got this blue path and we've also got this red path. Now that we've created these paths, the next step before we start the tour, we need to take a look at the specific tour settings and adjust those settings in Google Earth Pro. So we're going to jump up here real quick to Google Earth Pro. We're going to come down to preferences and we're going to click on the touring button. These settings are not hard and fast, and you may want to experiment and try different things with these. I want to make a note here. Areas that are steeper or that have flatter topography may look and feel better during these tours with some adjustments to these settings. So, I just want to make sure I point this out that these are not hardcore end-all settings. These are just the settings that I prefer and the way that I like to use this tour. So the first thing that you can see is the time between features. I don't usually mess with this. I usually set both of these to 0 seconds. I don't want to pause at any of the features. And I also do not usually select fly along lines. I'm pretty happy with the default fly along path that usually comes with it. And I don't see, in many cases, I don't see a lot of difference when I have this selected or not. So that's something you can play with, but fly along the lines is something that I don't usually mess with. This middle box here is really where most of the settings that you're going to want to adjust are. So the first setting is the camera tilt angle. This is the tilt or angle of the camera, meaning your view. So a 65-degree view is you're basically looking ahead at that degree. So the steeper that degree, the further ahead you're actually looking. But you have to be really careful with this, because if you start getting too high, like in that 75 and 80 degrees and even more, when you start getting at that real high tilt, things start looking a little wonky. I have found that the optimal setting for me seems to be between 60 and 70 degrees. So you can play around with that number, but for this example, I've got it set for 65. The camera range is the next adjustment. This is the approximate height off the ground. This is something I like to play with and adjust depending on my goals and my objectives. I change this quite a bit to get a closer in view or a more bird's eye further out view, depending on what I'm trying to do. So for example, sometimes when I first am looking at a hunt area, I will back that camera range out to 1,500, even 2,000 meters, so that I'm looking at a much more broader picture view. And as I get more specific or more narrowed down in a hunt area, I'll bring that camera range in to that 500, 600, even closer sometimes. So that camera range is a really nice feature that you can adjust the distance that you're viewing from. But for this example, for this flyover, at least for now, we're going to set it, you know what, let's go ahead and set this to 1,100. The next adjustment that we're going to want to mess with is the speed. This is another adjustment that I tend to adjust depending on what my objective is. If I want to get a quick, big bird's eye view, I'll want to make sure that I'm flying along at a pretty reasonable clip so that I'm just trying to absorb the territory. I'm not really trying to zoom in on anything just yet. I just want to get a quick look and try to orientate myself in my general area. I will note that the closer in you set this camera range, for example, if you drop this camera range to 200 meters, you're going to have to bring that speed down quite a bit, like 100 or less. The closer in you're viewing from, the more important the speed setting is. So again, once you start playing with this, you're going to figure that out. But there's a couple things that I do want to point out. When you're changing these settings, you got to make sure you exit the tour completely, go back into preferences, change the preferences, hit the apply button, and then restart the tour. You cannot change the preferences in the middle of a playing tour. One of the other things I want to quickly point out is once you start messing with these settings a bunch, sometimes Google Earth just gets kind of clogged up. I don't know what happens with it, but many times you'll have to restore the default. So a lot of times I will just hit restore default and I'll say okay, and I'll start over with some maybe new or lesser aggressive settings. And the other thing that sometimes I'll want to do is to just close Google Earth Pro and open it back up. You know, that's one of the things, or one of the pitfalls of using Google Earth Pro, is the caching of images, and sometimes these settings can get a little funky and you have to restart Google Earth Pro or you have to restore the defaults. So just keep that in mind. It's real simple to do. If things are starting to look a little strange, just resort to some of those tactics. Okay, now that we've got our settings set, now let's talk about how to specifically run the tour. So now that we've got these, we're going to click apply. We're going to say okay. So now we've got the settings set. We've got our path created. We're going to use this red path. So now we're going to look at just the plain aerial photo view in Google Earth Pro. We've got most of our other activity over here in My Places turned off. And now we're going to play this image. One of the things that I do want to point out is that in many cases, if we go up here to preferences, okay, we're going to go up here to cache, and we're going to clear the memory cache, and we're going to clear the disk cache. What this allows us to do is refresh the cache so that when we're flying this tour, it will reload and cache the images along this route. You could see right there the imagery was starting to clear up. This is especially the case if you've got a slower internet connection. So as it relates to cache, I wanted to point out a couple of more things. So you might play this tour the first time and things will be a little blurry as their images are starting to load. The second and third time you play the tour, the imagery will become more clear and it will play more consistent because Google Earth Pro is caching all those image tiles. So once those image tiles are completely cached, then the tour will be in focus. It'll be a lot more usable. So just keep that in mind. If you're having trouble with blurry images, give Google Earth time to load the images. Again, if you start to have issues, with this. Just clear that cache as we just demonstrated in the preference settings and start over with the cache settings. Okay, so when it comes to running the tour, it's a pretty simple process. We're going to come over here, and so the name of our tour, if we click on that line, you can see that it'll highlight it. It's a sample hunt area tour. So once that particular path is highlighted, all we've got to do is come down here to the play tour button. It's important that you don't get this play tour confused with this button right here, which is record a tour. Record a tour is going to create a recording or a file as you tour around. That's something you might want to do. But in this case, we just want to play a tour. We do not want to record a tour. So to just play the tour, we're going to come down here and we're going to select play tour. You can see the info box comes up and we're going to click the play button. Once the playhead comes up, you can set this tour to repeat itself and it's going to fly along our line. You can see that my internet connection here in Montana is not the best. So you can see the imagery is looking a little blurry. But as we get closer to it, you can see it's starting to resolve and starting to come into focus. So we're flying along this path that we created and we're taking a look at the landscape around. We can see meadows, we can see edge habitats, we can see this nice green slope over here, we see some green mixed in here. Looks like right here we can see an edge of this looks like a burn area, edge of a burn. We don't know how old that is, but it's something we might want to investigate. We can see some rocky areas here. We're kind of coming up over this little ridge back down in this. We can see an old road here at this point, and we've seen a couple of structures there. We might want to investigate that. So as it flies along the path, we can just start making notes or making mental notes of what we're seeing, and we're just sitting back and we're just watching this tour play. It's incredibly useful for me when I'm evaluating a new hunting area. You can see here that the imagery is still resolving a little as we can go. You can see here as it comes down, there's the end of the tour. Once it reaches the end, it'll start playing over because we have this loop setting set. Okay, once the image plays over, you'll notice that now the resolution is much better. Now, with the steepness of this slope, it's a little fuzzy. You can see there's still a little resolving of imagery. As Google Earth flies along this line, you can stop at any point in this tour. So let's say we're coming up this ridge line here, and we're climbing up here, it looks like. And as we start to come down, we're going to take this contour around right here. And as we start to come down this ridge line, we're going to just pause it right here. So to pause it, all you have to do is just click. You click on the screen and it will pause it. So there's a couple of things that you can do once you pause the tour. So you can see down here in the playhead, that's where we're at in our 35-second tour, and our location is in this general area. Let's say, for example, we're on this ridge here. We want to see what our view is from here, and we want to really, I know we're looking at this angle, but we'd like to look at a 360-degree view from this particular spot on the tour. So I'm going to show you two ways that you can do that. The first way is to hold down the shift key and to use the right or left arrow. So if we use the right arrow, Google Earth Pro will start spinning from that particular location 360 degrees around. So now I can look 360 degrees from this spot around this point in the tour. Very useful feature for looking at areas along a tour route. So when we use the shift and the arrow key, you notice a couple of things. It is staying at the same elevation and the tilt angle is staying the same. So I use this shift arrow key a lot when I'm stopping and I just want to take a look around from a particular spot on this tour route. The second option is to once again hold down the shift key and utilize your mouse. So if we utilize the mouse, we can see the target on the screen there. We immediately have control of the tilt and the angle. So now we can do that same 360 degree view, but now we have complete control of the tilt and the viewing angle. So we can and we can also let up on the mouse, use the scroll wheel and zoom in, click back on the shift, hold down the left key of the mouse, and now we can tilt again. So more from a bird's eye view right here on this ridge, what can we see? So just for example, from this ridge line, from this rocky outcropping right here, we got a nice view of this burn area. This looks like a burned area with some island timber patches in there. This looks like a really nice looking basin. We've got some slope here. We've got this basin up high. We've got this slope running down. We can even see over into here. So this is a way for us to kind of preliminarily look at some potential glassing spots as we're flying along a tour route. Now, to get the tour started again, all you need to do is come down here and just hit the play. And this play button will start the tour. It'll readjust the angle. It'll readjust the elevation to your tour settings, and it will proceed on with the tour. So we'll start it up again. You'll see that it reset everything, and now that we're flying along that tour path once again. So I hope that you can really see the value of this and how you could integrate and use this tour or this play tour function when you're just looking at a hunt area and you're trying to analyze it and you're just trying to get a good overall picture of what you're dealing with. I want to give you some ideas of some more potential uses for this functionality when you're looking at hunt areas and trying to break them down. So number one, I use this tool a lot to fly burns. I will trace the border of a burn area, basically the whole perimeter of a burn, and I will fly in pretty close to that edge and just take a look at that edge habitat all the way around the burn. I want to see where the creeks and drainages enter the burn. I want to see where the timber fingers come out into the burn. I want to see the green areas, the brighter green areas, which might indicate more, an increase in moisture levels. I will do that with burns. I will do that with logging areas, and I will just create a border with a path tool, and I'll just fly that particular feature. So it's not only just useful for looking at big areas or landscape purposes, you can zero in on specific features and get a little more, dialed in. So another example, you guys know that if you're taking the course, I spend a lot of time in the course analyzing hunting pressure, meaning where their hunting pressure is coming from, how they're using the area, how are they getting in, how are they navigating an area. So one of the ways that I do that is I look very closely at the trails and the roads and old four-wheel drive roads and try to make some predictions on use and activity. Well, one of the ways that I do it is just by zooming in on the trail and looking at it in the highest resolution. But another way that I do it many times is to set the settings on this tour tool and draw the line along a particular trail or a route that I want to evaluate, slow the speed down, zoom in much closer to the ground, and just set back and get a good idea of what I think is going on with that particular trail. So let's take a look at that. In this last example, we're going to take a look. I've already prepared this trail path example. So we're going to double click that to move us over to that particular path, which is over here. It's a short path. It just flies up this drainage. This is basically an old pack trail. It looks like an old pack trail on the topographic map. So to show you what I'm talking about, I'm going to click on Earth Point Topo. And you can see, I have no idea in relation if this is a good elk hunting area or not. I just randomly picked this, guys. So we've got this old road here. I don't even know if this is private land. We've got this road, and then we've got this trail that kind of comes up through this, not too aggressive of a drainage, and then connects back over here to this road. So what we want to do is we want to fly along this path and take a look at it. So I've got this path really minimized. So for example, I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to Get Info. I'm going to go to Style. I'm going to change. I'm going to take that down even further to 0.5, and I'm going to make it white. The reason that I am minimizing this path is because I'm not interested in the path. I'm interested in seeing the ground, this particular trail, because I'm trying to make a determination on usage. So I want to minimize the line thickness so it doesn't interfere with my view. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to turn back off this Earth Point Topo view. I'm going to go up here to the settings, and remember, I've got to adjust my settings. So I'm going to click back on Tour. I'm going to leave my camera tilt at 65, but I'm going to take my camera meters down to about 200 meters. So guys, when you start getting below 200 meters, I found in most imagery, now some of the 2019 imagery, you can get a little closer, but once you start getting inside that 200-meter range, things start getting a little blurry. The zoom levels don't accommodate that close of a zoom in, and it's just not as usable. So for this example, and you can play with this number, but for this example, we're going to set it at 200. We're going to set our camera tilt at 65, but we're going to slow our speed way down to 75. Remember what I said earlier. The more you zoom in from the camera range or reduce your elevation, the lower your speed has to be in order for it to be applicable or usable. So we're going to click apply, and we're going to say okay. And then we're going to come over here and click on our trail path example, which we've got highlighted in white, and we're just going to hit the play tour button. Replay, we're going to leave this replay button on, and you can see that we're climbing kind of up this ridge here. We're coming up this ridge, and then now we're getting it. You can see the trail now. We can see it. It's there. It's visible. We're kind of going through the trees. I might even want to slow this down a little more to really get. You can see the imagery is loading, but it's still a little fuzzy, so we're probably going to want to play this tour again once we cache the imagery. So now you can see we're breaking out here. I'm going to pause this tour. I'm going to click on it right here. So a couple of things I'm noticing already, just pointing out, this isn't really what this segment is about, but I wanted to highlight something. I can see this trail kind of diverging off here. I can see it kind of coming off here. I can see, it looks like I can see some trails up here next to the sage and this brushy area, these timber patches. I can see a trail kind of spinning off here. These are not necessarily on the topographic map. So I'm going to hit play again and take a little closer look. It's going to fly down through. I can still see a bunch of trails along the side hill here. I can see trails in the bottom. I can see a lot of trails working through this area. So I'm going to pause that again. So when I see something, I can see a fence there. So we might be in the private land area. So while we're playing this, I want to point this out because this is one of the benefits you'll get from taking the time to do this is you can see all these multiple trails. What does that tell us? Well, to me, this tells me that there's probably cattle in this area. It looks to me like those trails, they're way too prominent. They're very parallel. They're very specific, and they're very directional. So that tells me that this is probably a good indication that there's cattle running in this area. Does that eliminate this spot for a potential hunt area? No, it does not. It just gives me something else that I need to investigate and look into a little bit closer before I really want to make an investment potentially, in this hunt area. So we did a quick view. We got to look at it. So we'll just continue on with our tour. So it readjusts and it starts flying the path again. Now you can see it switches from a trail to an old road. Again, we're gaining historical knowledge. We're coming up through here, just a little bit of a saddle here in this drainage before it drops down to this other connector road that we saw on the topographic map. One of the last things that I'll leave you with is when I create these tours, I will run these tours many, many times. I'll change elevations. Sometimes I'll even change camera angles. And I will sometimes even create the route the opposite direction so that it will fly the tour from the opposite direction so I can get another perspective or another viewing angle. So once you run through these tours many, many times, I just can't tell you how valuable and how useful the information is that you'll pick up. Small things, very subtle things that you'll pick up doing this. I hope that I did a good job explaining this and that you're able to utilize and use this in your hunt planning. Good luck with your hunts this year, and please don't hesitate to email me or contact me through treelineacademy.net with any questions you might have. I hope you've enjoyed this mini-series segment. We cover this topic and so much more in the E-Scouting Elk Masterclass. If you want to explore the course more and start finding more elk, you can just visit treelineacademy.net. Thank you.